Over the last few months, I've been part of a conversation about the trade-offs between speed and reusability. And I would like to present a very simple 2x2 grid showing this concept, and I think it's helpful in a lot of domains, even outside of software development. So if you imagine a 2x2 grid, on the horizontal x-axis, you could plot speed. And on the left, you would have slow, and on the right, as you move further right, you would have increasing speed or fast. And then on the vertical y-axis, you could plot reusability. And towards the bottom, you would have non-reusable, and then towards the top, you would have very reusable. And this might be a very simple four-quadrant grid. And it also is worth pointing out, though, that the term reusable, you could also substitute other words in for. For instance, you might substitute the word automation, or the level of automation, or level of generalizability. But we'll just use the term reusable for now. Most organizations live in a state in the bottom left quadrant, or many startups especially. And that's in a state where things are very slow and non-reusable. And the goal is over time to move towards the top right quadrant, where things move quickly and are highly reusable. Now, moving quickly and having high reusability go really hand in hand. In previous blog posts have discussed how modularity and reusability lead to the ability to move quicker and more cheaply. But the question is how one moves from the bottom left, where things are slow and non-reusable, up towards the top right, where things are moving quickly and are very reusable. And I think there are two different routes to get there. The first, or route one, the primary movement is along the horizontal x-axis, from slow to fast. And so you move from the bottom left quadrant up through the bottom, or towards the bottom right quadrant, and then up to the upper right. And this comes, of course, with the immediate benefit of increasing speed variable, but the trade-off is not achieving early reusability, and this may result in more efforts required later to achieve reusability. Route 2, the option, has the dominant movement moving along the y-axis. And so in this case, you move from the bottom left quadrant up to the upper left quadrant, and then finally to the top right. And the benefits in this case are of having higher reusability at the start, but this comes with the trade-off that speed may be diminished at the beginning, and that this route might be more resource intensive at the start. Now, these two examples are rather vague in their description, and that's because I think you can apply them to many different settings. But let's look at three specific examples on how you could use these concepts. The first is the example of a typical startup. And in this case, the debate between reusability and speed is often a discussion between technical considerations and product development considerations. For instance, from a technical perspective, it may be preferable to write code that is more reusable from the start. But from a product development perspective, it may be preferable to ship products faster, and so that you can test those products with users. In theory, taking route 2, focusing on reusability, may achieve a net productivity saving in the amount of resources required, because you're building in reusability from the start. But this is only really true if the product pathway is very clear. In most operations and industries and new ventures, there is a high level of uncertainty of the next steps in the product development pathway. And in those cases, it makes more sense to adopt route 1, where you ship products quicker so that you can improve upon the products and achieve the kind of the term we use now, product market fit, and valuing that earlier on over reusability. This trade-off between reusability and speed, I think, is an alternative way to view Paul Graham's classic essay on do things that don't scale. Doing something that scales, and as I say, this concept of scale or reusability could be substituted with automation or generalizability, is much closer to a route two approach to do something that scales. But in Paul's essay, he really suggests that there's probably better for many organizations to focus earlier on route one, essentially, doing things which achieve faster results rather than scale. In example 2, reusability might be fundamental to the business success. For instance, in the case of SpaceX, the core business proposition was rocket reusability, and being able to position the company in the upper quadrants with reusability was a necessary part of the business strategy. And so it is certainly possible to adopt Route 2 at the start of a venture, but I think that this probably would require more upfront initial resources to make it happen. And as I say, ideally having a more clear understanding of the product pathway is likely beneficial. You might also experience times where there are competing hypotheses, and this is example 3. Right now I'm working with an open source enterprise software project, and there are 2 competing hypotheses that require testing. And the first one, the hypothesis 1, is more from the technical side. And in this, the hypothesis is that if we can build an environment which makes it possible to achieve high reusability of the code base, this will increase developer and team collaboration. And then this will in turn increase the speed that products can be built, making it possible to move more efficiently to build, test, and deploy new products. So that's kind of in some ways a Route 2 hypothesis. Or the other hypothesis really states that we need to more focus on the product side, and by improving the speed which we develop a product, we can better understand exactly what should be built. And then once we have this tangible thing, this tangible product that should be built, it will perhaps increase excitement so that more people will contribute shared resources and collaboration to building that. And then in turn, those resources could be allocated to achieving higher reusability of the code base at a later point. And that's more of a Route 1 hypothesis. And exactly how to balance these questions, I think, remains, in this case, really to be seen and unclear. And so this is a simple 4-quadrant way which you can understand how speed and reusability are both 2 competing variables and the way which you move from an organization which is in the lower left quadrant where things are slow and non-reusable towards the upper right quadrant where things are fast and very reusable has potentially different routes to achieve that success.